Today, as you might have seen from the title of this episode, I'm doing something a little bit different. Every other week I talk with a guest and we talk about some kind of issue that they are currently researching or writing about, or they have written a book on, or something along those lines. But there's lots of things that don't go into the podcast that I want to introduce. So I want to talk about some of the things that I have on my mind, some of the arguments that I've been working on or thinking through, and I thought I'd bring them to you. It's my way of getting out what's in my head for me, and it's also my attempt to provide you with some additional food for thought in those in between weeks. So it's not this very long conversation. My goal is to make these episodes sort of short and sweet and to give you plenty to think about. So that's what I'm going to try out, calling it Reed's Argument, and they'll be on a variety of topics related to the typical theme of this podcast, which is, of course, ethics and tech, very broadly construed. So in each episode, I'll give you some kind of argument. I'd also love for you to tell me what you think about the argument. I'd love for you to talk to each other about it. So you can head over to readblackman.substack.com, where I'll post some version of what I'm going to say here. And you can also go to my YouTube page, youtube.com/@readblackman, where this episode of the podcast will be uploaded, as are all of my episodes. And you can go into the comment section there. So would love to hear from you, and would love to you to engage with each other about this. That's the end game. Finally, please share this episode, give it 5 stars, etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to go. Let's play some theme music, and then let's start this thing. So I've been thinking a lot lately about the extent to which we should value human deliberation. I want to think about the fact that we use our deliberative capacities to solve problems, and whether that deliberation is itself of some kind of important value that we should cherish. So, look, on one view, our deliberative capacities, they're just another tool. We use our deliberation as a means to the end of bringing about a result we want. But on another view, human deliberation itself is not merely of instrumental value. It's not just a way of getting us the stuff that we want, but it's also what a philosopher would call of intrinsic value. Human deliberation itself is something we ought to care about for its own sake, and not just because it's the kind of thing that brings about desirable results, at least when things go well. So there's this sort of tension between how you might think about the value of deliberation. And I'm going to bring out that tension by thinking about 2 kinds of scenarios. Those 2 scenarios should draw out that tension. And my goal is not only to demonstrate that tension, but to explain how appreciating that tension, or appreciating the pull of those 2 different positions, puts us in really ethically difficult waters when we think about ways that AI might outperform us, if not today, then tomorrow. So here's the first scenario. Call it the deliberative doctor scenario, okay? So I want you to suppose that we have an AI that's very, very good at diagnosing patients. And that's because it has all the medical knowledge. It's sort of possessed with all of our collective human medical knowledge. So this thing is an oncologist, it's a pediatrician, it's an endocrinologist, it's a geneticist, all the things. Now, what happens when you have an AI like this, and we're not there yet, but this is sort of looks like it's coming potentially. What you have is something that's very hard for an individual doctor to vet, right? Because if this thing says, oh, here's the diagnosis, and here's why, and here's the prediction based on the data that I have, blah, 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 the individual doctor will have her particular expertise, which is relatively narrow, right? She's an endocrinologist, and that's it. Or she's just an oncologist, or she's just a pediatrician. She's not all the things. And so she can't say, oh, I think we should reject this suggestion. Or you might think she shouldn't just reject the suggestion that the AI makes, because after all, the AI has more knowledge than she does. That said, in this imagined scenario, I want you to suppose that this AI, this diagnosing AI, has undergone a tremendous amount of testing, and it turns out that it is more accurate than the best doctors out there. It's just a phenomenally effective tool at diagnosing illnesses, better than people, precisely because it has so much more knowledge. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were to take my kid to the doctor, or I had to choose, do I want this amazing AI or do I want the smart doctor? I think I'd go with the AI. Again, on the condition that we know the AI has been really, really well tested and it consistently outperforms people. I think there's strong reason to go with the AI and not with the human doctor. I mean, the human mind is feeble, and this AI knows more than that doctor. Now, in this kind of scenario, and I know it strikes you as, or probably strikes you as quite unlikely, but suppose it were the case, if we don't have human deliberators anymore, if we don't have really humans engaging in diagnosing patients anymore, or to a much less extent, I don't I don't think there's a real loss there. Now, of course, doctors will lose potentially some revenue or jobs, but I don't think that we've lost something in using what you could call medical deliberation about medical conditions. And that's because when it comes to healthcare, all I really care about is the effects of the deliberation. All I really care about is the results, the outcomes. I want me to be healthy. I want healthy children. So I don't really care about the loss of what I'm calling medical deliberation. But in the next scenario, I think things are a little bit different. So let me explain that scenario. Call the scenario the deliberative judge. And now I want you to consider an AI that determines criminal sentences. So the defendant has been found guilty, and now the judge has to determine, should this person go to prison, and if so, for how long? Now, when there's a human judge doing this, they consider a variety of factors. One thing they do is consider the severity of the crime that was committed. So that's sort of backwards looking, if you like. And then they also consider the likelihood that the person may commit a crime in the future. So it's also forwards looking. Now, here's the thing, though. Human judges are pretty bad at this sort of thing for at least two reasons. Number one, just like any other person, they're really bad at predicting the future. And so they're just not good at knowing or taking very educated guesses about the likelihood that some given individual will commit a crime in the future. There's just too many variables and there's just too many unknowns. The second thing to say is that human judges are, of course, biased in a variety of ways. Now, the most obvious way in which they're biased is that they're racially biased. This is very well documented. But there's other issues as well. So judges suffer from various cognitive deficiencies, just like people do, and just like anyone else does, right? So they can make common mistakes in reasoning, and they could also just make mistakes as a result of temporary cognitive deficiencies, like they just didn't get enough sleep. And then there's another issue, which is that various kinds of emotions might cloud the judgment of a judge. So maybe they're suffering from depression, maybe they're distracted because they're going through an acrimonious divorce, maybe they are resentful of the defendant because they were previously victims to a similar crime and now they've got an axe to grind. So all these kinds of things, let's just call them biases, are going to make the judge less good at coming to an appropriate, good, reasonable conclusion. But now I want you to consider this AI that has access to a huge range of data, and so it's better at predicting crime. Doesn't need to be amazing. They just say better at predicting the likelihood of committing a crime. It's not going to suffer from depression or going through a divorce or lack of sleep or have an axe to grind or anything like that. And yes, of course, there's many documented cases of AI being biased in a variety of ways, including especially being racially biased. But let's suppose we have a case in which the AI is less biased than judges, which, to tell you the truth, is really sort of a low bar since humans are so biased. And so what the result is, we're supposing in this scenario, is that the AI is just better than human at judging in terms of both accuracy and bias. Okay, so those are the two scenarios. Now, here's a lesson that I want to draw from these two scenarios, the doctor and the judge and their respective deliberations. One thing that you might think is that we should replace judges in sentencing procedures on the condition that we have an AI that's more accurate and less biased than the judges that we have right now. And the result would be fewer people getting inappropriate sentences. And that means, among other things, a less racially discriminatory criminal justice system. And the impacts, of course, would be significant. That said, I feel a kind of deep hesitancy to replace human judges with AI judges, even if the AI is better at judging. And the reason that I feel this hesitancy is that I think there's something valuable about the deliberations of human judges. The deliberation of human judges, I think, is not merely a means to the end of figuring out how to treat someone, but I think that deliberation is itself, in this context, intrinsically valuable. What do I think is intrinsically valuable about it? Well, I think it's valuable because engaging in that deliberation is part of what it is to treat someone with respect in this context. It's to take another individual, take that criminal defendant. It's to take them seriously. It's a way of demonstrating or expressing appropriate respect for that person's life or that person's dignity or the weightiness of the kind of decision or impact it's going to have on that person's life. You could sort of contrast this with a judge flipping a coin, right? A judge flipping a coin to determine whether the sentence should be 1 year in prison or 2 years in prison. That's sort of, it's too flippant, pardon the pun, it's too flippant. Uh, that you need to take it seriously in order to treat the person with sufficient respect. And of course, if we replace a human, we don't have that, we have an AI instead, that crucial, arguably crucial way of demonstrating respect in this kind of context is taken away. So the short of it is that I think that we ought to value the deliberation of human judges more than the deliberations of a doctor, because the latter is purely instrumental, while the former, the judge, is instrumental. It has some instrumental value. It brings about something that we desire. But it also, I think, it self-instantiates the value of taking other people's lives and their worth seriously. Okay. But, of course, it's not even that simple. So I'd love to say to you, yeah, look, ta-da, we're done here. Human deliberation is valuable in these kinds of contexts because they manifest or instantiate respect for persons. But I think that there are two objections that we need to take account of. And I think they're very serious objections. And I think that they might even win the day. So here's the two. The first objection is that I'm romanticizing human judges' deliberations. Somebody might say, yeah, look, there's cases of good, impartial, careful judges, but the truth is that most of them are riddled with various kinds of flaws, both cognitive and moral in nature. And their deliberations are too flawed to value in the way that I suppose. You might say something like, their deliberation looks great in the way that the exterior of a gutted brownstone in Brooklyn is beautiful. It's beautiful from the outside, but when you look inside, it's just a total mess. So maybe I'm overly romanticizing the kinds of deliberation that judges, in fact, engage in. That's one kind of thing, and I think it's a very important objection. The second one, I think, is even harder to deal with, frankly. The second objection says, look, I'll grant that the human judges' deliberations are valuable, but they're not valuable enough to stop us replacing judges with AI. And that's because, roughly, the value of having a more just criminal justice system and the value of fewer people being wronged by inappropriate sentences outweighs the value of having human judges, of having that deliberation going on. So yes, the objection says something valuable is lost if we replace human judges with more accurate AI judges, but we gain a lot more by it. So I'm going to wrap up now. Like I said, I think that these objections, they probably win the day in the case of the AI judge doing sentencing. I'm not totally sure, to be honest. I think we need to think a lot more about this. And this is just one aspect or one issue to think about in replacing judges with humans. There's also issues pertaining to whether we can explain why the person is getting the decision that they're getting, and whether humans are black boxes just like AI is, and so on and so forth. Put that to the side. So there's a lot more to think about whether, all else equal, we should replace humans with AI, human judges with AI, in those cases where the AI judges are more accurate, less biased, and so on. That said, I don't know if those objections win the day. And moreover, I don't know if they win the day more generally. That is to say, I think that there are probably a variety of cases where the value of human deliberation, or to put it more generally, the value of the human process in bringing about a certain end result, the process itself, could be of sufficient value such that we shouldn't replace it with AI, even if AI comes up with better results. The creative process in fine art, for instance, strikes me as a candidate for such a situation. But what I hope is that these examples and my thoughts on them, I hope that they bring out first that human deliberation is, at least in some cases, not merely of instrumental value, but intrinsically valuable. And the second thing is that despite its value, it may be justifiably overridden in a variety of cases that have tremendous impact on individuals and society at large. So when should the value of our processes win the day, and versus when should just the value of the outcome matter more than whether there's any human deliberation taking place? I suspect that we can't have a sort of general principled answer to this sort of thing. I think it has to proceed on a case-by-case basis. And given the vast array of contexts in which AI may be embedded, that just means that we have a lot of thinking to do.